Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. It's Wendy Baker for the Commission. And today we have Dr. Laura Rempel and Dr. Marvin Rosenau, which are our first panels to deal with gravel removal. Before we begin with the witnesses, though, I would like to mark the policy and practice report that was prepared for this portion of the hearings. It's dated May 20, 2011, and it's entitled Gravel Removal in the Lower Fraser River.
It'll be PPR number 16.
Thank you. All right, these witnesses haven't testified before. Could they both be sworn?
I solemnly affirm that the evidence to be given by you in this hearing shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
I do.
State your name, please.
Laura Rempel.
Marvin Rosenau.
Thank you. Counsel.
Thank you. I'll start with you, Dr. Rempel. If I could have your CV pulled up on the screen, please. It's tab number 1. Thank you. First of all, that is your CV?
It is.
All right, I'll have that marked, please.
Exhibit 1068.
Okay, thank you. You have a PhD in physical geography, and your dissertation in that degree was on physical and ecological organization in large gravel bed rivers and responses to disturbances by gravel mining, and it's all in the Fraser River, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, and just looking at your CV, you identify that, well, first of all, presently you're working as a habitat biologist with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans.
Yeah, that's correct.
Prior to that, you were a research scientist with DFO and led research programs in habitat risk assessment, aquatic biomonitoring, and fish habitat. That's right?
Yes, correct.
And you have worked in stream and river environments for over 15 years, focusing on fish habitat interactions, habitat productivity, and the physical and hydrological aspects of productive fish habitat, correct?
Yeah, correct.
All right, you, before you were a habitat biologist, you were an environmental analyst and also a river systems ecologist?
Correct.
And on pages 2 and 3 of your CV, the publications relevant to this topic are set out, or relevant to your work, I should say, are set out. The first one under refereed publications is a paper that you wrote with Dr. Michael Church, which was published in 2009, and it is entitled Physical and Ecological Responses to Disturbances by Gravel Mining in a Large Alluvial River.
Yeah, correct.
And that has direct application to the Fraser system, is that right?
Yes, correct.
You have also, if I move to your reports under technical and professional reports on page 3, a paper also prepared with Dr. Church in 2003 called the Harrison Bar Gravel Removal Experiment Final Report. That was while you were still a student, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Moving to page 4, I see a report that you did with Weatherly called 2003 Fraser River Potential Gravel Removals, and that was prepared by Kerwood Lidl for the BC Ministry of Water, Land, Air and Protection.
Yes, correct.
And also another work with Dr. Church called Morphological and Habitat Classification of the Lower Fraser River Gravel Bed Reach, and that was also prepared while you were a student, is that right?
That's right.
Mr. Commissioner, I'll ask for both of these witnesses to be qualified as experts, but I'll first go through the qualifications of Dr. Rosenau next, and then I'll ask them to be qualified together. Dr. Rosenau, your CV is at tab 19. Okay, is that your CV?
That's correct.
Okay, have that marked, please.
Exhibit 1069.
Okay. All right, you have a PhD in fisheries science, is that right?
The DPhil, same thing.
Okay. And you have a Master's of Science in Zoology as well?
That's correct.
You were previously with the Ministry of the Environment, also known as Ministry of Water, Land and Air Protection for the BC government from 1991 to 2006.
That's correct.
And in that role you were involved in river sediment management and development of impacts on floodplains. And you can see that referenced on page 2 at the top of your resume.
That's correct.
And in that work, did you engage in work involving the gravel reach of the Fraser River?
That's right. I sat on the technical committee, basically referred to as the gravel committee of the Fraser, in addition to a number of other watersheds, the Vetter Chilliwack, etc.
Okay. And turning to page 4 of your CV, your publications are set out. And looking at under primary scientific journals, can you identify which of these are relevant to Fraser River gravel reach and fish habitat in the gravel river?
The Perrin, Rempel, and Rosenau, 2003. To a lesser degree, the Vineau paper, which dealt with sturgeon, and that's predominantly the ones in the refereed publication.
Okay, and then under symposia, there's a number of other works which are relevant to the Fraser River gravel reach, I take it, and fish habitat in that area.
Most of the sturgeon ones, and some of the reports with Mark Angelo for the Pacific Fisheries Resource Conservation Council, one in particular on sand and gravel removal.
All right, if I can add, that's on page 6, is it?
It might be as far back as, or far down as that, yeah.
Okay. So if you can identify which documents those are. Well, I can see the third from the bottom under the Pacific Fisheries Resource. Title is a document with you and Dr. Angelo, Sand and Gravel Management and Fish Habitat Protection in British Columbia salmon and steelhead streams. Is that the one you're referring to?
Yes, much of that dealt with the Fraser River. Second from the top, Rosenau and Angelo, 2007, also dealt with that issue as well, specific to the Fraser and the gravel reach.
And then moving on to technical reports and articles, second from the top is an article or a report that you prepared with Dr. Church and Ellis, 2004, characterization of 4 floodplain side channels of the lower Fraser River.
That's correct. It was a student that I was co-supervising with Dr. Church.
Okay. Have you supervised any other PhD theses or work by students on the gravel reach?
Laura Rempel's sitting beside me at the PhD level.
Any others?
No.
And I should identify, Dr. Rempel, your thesis is actually in the Commission's documents at tab 2, and it's titled Physical and Ecological Organization in a Large Gravel Bed River and Response to Disturbance. And what was the subject of that in layman's terms?
The focus of my thesis was looking at the physical habitat characterization of the gravel reach in the Fraser River and characterizing the ecological communities associated with these habitats.
And are either of you fluvio-geomorphologists?
Go ahead.
No.
No, but I've interacted with quite a few over the years, so I do have some level of understanding, which I would suggest Laura probably does too, but I don't want to put words in her mouth.
Yes, I carried out my PhD in the Department of Geography at UBC and studied directly with Dr. Michael Church, who's one of the preeminent fluvial geomorphologists in the province. So I have training in that, but I wouldn't say that's my realm of expertise.
All right, and in terms of habitat and impacts on habitat by fluvial geomorphology and hydrology, is that within your area of expertise? Do you use that knowledge in assessing habitat impacts in your work?
Yes, directly.
Dr. Rosenau?
Same for me.
Mr. Commissioner, I'd like both of these witnesses qualified as experts in two areas. One, freshwater fish habitat in flowing waters and rivers, with an emphasis in the lower Fraser. And second, experts in fluvial geomorphology and hydrology as those relate to freshwater aquatic ecosystems and flood profiles.
Government of Canada. I just want to be clear on the record what the extent of the qualifications for these two witnesses are, and I have a couple of questions that I'd like to put to them in that regard. First, do either of you have any academic training in hydraulic engineering?
No, not directly.
Not directly either.
And no professional experience as hydraulic engineers?
No.
Well, I have managed hydraulic engineering studies, so I have had hydraulic engineers work for me And so by association, I do have some experience, but I'm not a hydraulic engineer.
No, and you've already stated that you're not a fluvial geomorphologist proper. You've
Not a registered professional
You've read
fluvial geomorphologist.
Sorry. Okay, thank you. Do you have any training or work experience in the area of flood risk management?
Could you define flood risk management?
Devising strategies or assessing strategies as pertaining to managing a flood risk in a river system.
Well, I sat on gravel committees vis-a-vis flood risk, so that is my experience. So both the Fraser River Technical Committee and the Vetter-Chilliwack Technical Committee, and that's my experience with flood risk management.
But you don't have any personal experience you brought to bear in those contexts, is that correct?
No, I do have personal experience because I sat on those committees dealing with flood engineers, managing hydraulic modeling, and I've also, in effect, provided my opinion on those issues. I'm not a flood engineer, so that's the distinction.
Okay, so you're not a flood engineer, thank you. And do you have any particular expertise in public safety issues generally from a policy or operational level from your experience?
Maybe you can describe that a little bit more clearly.
I'm wondering if you've ever brought personal experience or training to bear in the planning for public safety as it pertains to flood risk.
Well, I was the BC Hydro representative from a fish perspective in Victoria. I had a secondment in Victoria, and we dealt with flood issues, in particular the 1997 province-wide flood issue, and so that had those flood risk components to it. But I'm not trained as a flood risk engineer or manager.
Thank you.
Mr. Commissioner, Nicole Chavez for the record. I'm co-counsel for Stoller Tribal Council and the Chiam Indian Band. I also have some follow-up questions, if I may. Dr. Rosenau, looking at your CV, you list one of the cases that you were qualified in as R versus Douglas.
That's correct. I was one of the agency expert witnesses on that case.
And your qualifications were limited to being a habitat biologist in that case, right?
It could be, if that's what the document said.
And you specifically admitted in that case that you're not qualified to speak to fluvial geomorphology, correct?
I might have at that time.
And you would also recall that actually one of the points that the case came down to is the issue of whether gravel removal impacted or constituted destruction of fish habitat, right?
I believe that's correct, but you'd have to point the line out to me.
Sure, I could point the line out to you, but you would be aware that your qualifications came in question in that case by Judge Lenahan?
Well, I'd have to see the statement with regards to what he brought into question.
Okay. I'm going to ask to pull up the document from the province's list of documents under tab 23, please. I'm going to first take you to paragraph 143, if I may. Tab 23? Yeah, perfect. That would be on, I have a different version of the document, so just paragraph 143. Just taking you to that paragraph first, you agreed that you're not a fluvial geomorphologist or could not assess the stability of the armoring layer on top of the gravel drift that he had seen in January 1998. You recall making that statement, being questioned in that regard?
I'll accept it as written.
And actually, you would not be qualified to conduct geomorphological studies about channel stability, or generally your qualifications and accreditation does not qualify you to conduct geomorphological studies, correct?
I'm not a fluvial geomorphologist, but I deal with fluvial morphological issues as part of my habitat dealings. So I have a level of experience that allows me, I think, as a professional, not a registered professional fluvial geomorphologist, but as somebody who's dealt with the topic. And again, the court case was about 10 years ago, so there's been an additional 10 years of experience. So I do view myself as being able to make some comments.
But the court case was exactly about that issue, connecting the habitat aspect to the gravel removal and whether it did constitute the destruction of fish habitat, right? And that's in regard to what you were called, correct?
In a general sense, yes.
So I'm going to just take you briefly to paragraph 204, and you've reviewed this decision since it came down. You listed it in your CV, right? The case. Paragraph 204, please. And this is Judge Lanahan's ruling. I was unable to give any significant weight to the opinions of the three experts offered on issues which they admitted were beyond their expertise. As a result, the evidence on those important issues fell far below the required standard of proof. It is somewhat puzzling that the Crown did not call a fluvial geomorphologist or river engineer to testify when it must have known that that would be required. And it refers to other fluvial geomorphologists. And it states in paragraph 205 then, as mentioned earlier, the experts were unable to provide any meaningful direct evidence with regard to the effects of the gravel extract on fish habitat they described and discussed. Each relied on other secondary evidence, so to say. And so basically, you would agree with me that in this case, the conclusion was, one, that there wasn't sufficient expert evidence and qualifications rendered to
I don't think it's appropriate to ask the witness to agree with what an opinion of a court is. The opinion is what it is.
That is fine. But clearly, that connection was not established in that court case. You'd agree with that?
No, I would agree that the judge had his opinion and other people had their opinions. But, and I would also add that I'll put it this way, a lot of water's gone under the Rosedale-Agassiz Bridge in the interim, where people like Laura, myself, have spent a lot of time learning things, and so I think we're much, we understand the river much better.
You understand and you can read studies that fluvial geomorphologists have written, but you are not the one who is qualified to actually specifically conduct those studies or provide primary evidence on those as a fluvial geomorphologist, correct?
If I have to put a stamp under the Association of Professional Engineers and Fluvial Geomorphologists, no, I can't do that, but I can certainly make statements of my opinion given the extent of experience I've had in the interim.
In the field of habitat and drawing conclusions, but not as a fluvial geomorphologist. You'd agree with that?
The two are joined at the hip.
Where you rely on others to actually conduct these studies, but you're not the one qualified to conduct them, and you do not conduct them. You haven't conducted them in the context of the Lower Fraser River, have you?
Not in a global sense, but I do interact with them on a regular basis.
You interact with them, you don't conduct those studies.
That's correct.
Thank you, those are my questions.
Mr. Rosenau. Oh, could my friend clarify, is she only attacking the expertise of Dr. Rosenau in this?
Specifically, yes. I've seen Dr. Rempel's PhD, so I think she's able to comment in the context of what she did in her PhD, but regarding Dr. Rosenau, I would oppose the qualification on the second point.
Right, and I take it Federal Crown is of the same position?
Canada's position is that neither of these witnesses are qualified to give expertise or opinion evidence on the issue of flood risk impact and the engineering aspects of the topic today.
To be clear, Mr. Commissioner, I'm not asking either of these witnesses to be qualified as oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I had a third objector.
Boris Tyson for the province of British Columbia. The province concurs with the views of Canada on this matter.
To be clear, Mr. Commissioner, I'm not asking for either witness to be qualified as experts in flood risk, or however my friend for Canada described it. What I'm asking them to be qualified as is experts in freshwater fish habitat and flowing waters and rivers, with an emphasis in the Lower Fraser. I haven't heard anybody dispute that. And fluvial geomorphology and hydrology as those relate to freshwater aquatic ecosystems and flood profiles. And what I'm asking these people to do today is to assist you in understanding how changes in the river system and how changes in gravel beds affect habitat for fish, in particular sockeye salmon. That's why I've called these witnesses.
Could you just say the second part slowly?
Sure. Fluvial geomorphology and hydrology as those relate to freshwater aquatic ecosystems and flood profiles. So the issue that I'm asking these witnesses to testify on and to assist the court is how the flowing rivers affect fish habitat, how changes to the morphology of the river will affect fish habitat, particularly sockeye habitat. That's why I'm asking these witnesses to come and assist the court with their expertise in that area. And the case of Douglas, which Ms. Chavez took the witness to, in fact, in that case, Dr. Rosenauer was qualified at paragraph 97 of that decision. He was qualified as an expert in river fish biology with an emphasis on physical habitat, including sediment and its removal, and with regards to the life histories of salmonids and sturgeon and their habitats. So while there were comments made later in the judgment about areas that he ventured into outside of his expertise, the court did qualify Dr. Rosenauer within that exact area of expertise, which is, in my submission, another way of saying what I've asked them to be qualified here today as. And a number of the papers which have been described by Ms. Dr. Rosenauer were written post. And in terms of Ms. Chavez's submission that Dr. Rempel is qualified in this area, but Dr. Rosenauer is not, I note that Dr. Rosenauer supervised Dr. Rempel's thesis on this front, so it would be odd that the student is more qualified than the teacher.
I was not aware of this objection to the qualifications of these two witnesses to testify in the areas in which Ms. Baker has outlined, so I haven't really enough background at this stage. You've made very brief submissions on areas that are very technical. My suggestion is this is not a trial, we know, but my suggestion, if council will agree to it, is this, that we conduct a kind of voir dire around this evidence. I will allow Ms. Baker to examine the witnesses as she prepared to examine them in the areas that she has prepared to examine them in. You will all have an opportunity to cross-examine these witnesses once their evidence is completed by Ms. Baker. And when you make your final submissions, I will receive your submissions on really two matters. One, whether some parts of their evidence ought to be admitted as part of the commission process in terms of the body of evidence, or alternatively, the question of how much weight I ought to attach to a piece of evidence from either one of them given during the course of their testimony. And ultimately, I will deal with that when I issue my report in terms of what weight or whether I in fact treat their evidence as part of the body of evidence whatsoever. If we don't deal with it that way today, I would simply want to reserve on these objections, because I don't have enough at the moment background in these areas which are very technical to be able to give a ruling based simply upon a couple of paragraphs from a court decision and your very brief submissions today. So that would be my suggestion. If it's comfortable for council to conduct it that way, I'm content to do it that way.
I support that. I think my friends will find that the witnesses are not going to move out of the areas that I've described for them.
I'm quite content with that proposal. Thank you.
So am I, Mr. Commissioner.
As are we, Mr. Commissioner.
Thank you, council, very much. As I say, I don't plan to qualify them today. I reserve on that, but I will have an opportunity later to receive your submissions about the body of their evidence and how I ought to deal with it. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll start with you, Dr. Rempel. If you could just provide us with a bit of background, I'll ask you to lay a lot of the foundation for the evidence that we're going to hear today and tomorrow. First of all, if we could go to tab 3 of the Commission's documents, you'll see the article, 2009 article of Rempel and Church. This is the one I referred to. Ringtail, page 3, which is 54 out of the journal. There's a nice map that shows us the area, the study area, but that I think will be helpful for the Commissioner when you answer this question I'm going to pose, which is, can you identify the area known as the Gravel Reach on the Fraser River?
Yeah, Commissioner, referring to the figure here, the Gravel Reach is generally refers to a stretch of the Fraser River that's approximately 60 kilometers in length. It's bounded at the upstream end by the town of Hope and at the downstream end by the town of Mission, and it represents a stretch of the Fraser River that is predominantly an accumulation zone of gravel-sized sediment, and it's referred to as the Gravel Reach because it's gravel-sized sediment that makes up the bed of the river. And at the town of Mission, the gradient slackens to such a degree that the river no longer has the power to move gravel-sized sediment, so it transitions to a sand bed reach, and that's why from Mission downstream it's referred to as the Sand Reach.
Okay, thank you. And in your thesis, which we've included at tab 2, oh sorry, I'll first mark that exhibit please as the next exhibit, the article.
Exhibit 1070.
Which tab is that in the
3.
I have a screening report of mine. Maybe I have the wrong binder.
You should have the,
Yes.
is that the Commission's or the BC's?
It says gravel removal lease documents.
Yeah, okay, that's BC's
Oh, all right. I've got the wrong
volume.
one. I'm sorry. Apologies. My apologies. Thank you very much.
I know there's a lot of big binders for this one. I'm sorry. You're going to have strong wrists by the end of tomorrow.
Sorry, Ms. Baker.
Okay, so tab 3 is the article that Dr. Rempel wrote with Dr. Church, and we were looking at page 54 in the journal, but it's 3 in the ringtail numbers. And then I was going to ask Dr. Rempel to move to her PhD thesis because there's a useful diagram in that as well. And I think we've just got excerpts, I think, in the binder. But ringtail number, page number 100, should pull up a figure, right? Okay, so this, first of all, just identify this is a draft or a copy of your thesis.
That's correct.
I'll first mark the thesis as an exhibit, and then we'll go to the figure.
Exhibit 1071.
All right. Now, could you use this diagram and just explain to us how sockeye salmon may use aspects of the reach as you've... I think this is just a make-believe bar that shows all the different features you might see on a bar. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, this illustration in my thesis is meant to be a simple caricature of gravel bars that are commonly occurring along the gravel bed reach. Gravel bars are locations, are sedimentation zones. They're locations where gravel accumulates in large quantity, and the schematic is meant to depict the range of habitat types that we would typically see around the perimeter of a gravel bar. So it gives a sense of the variety and the complexity of these gravel bars, and each of these habitat types have a particular depth and velocity and substrate characterization, and that makes them more or less suitable and favorable for different fish species. And the channels that are depicted bounding the gravel bar, the main channel and side channel, as well as a summer channel intersecting diagonally across the bar, are meant to represent the different flow paths that sort of divert around these sedimentation gravel bar zones.
Right, so which of these areas would be used by sockeye salmon?
Based on the extensive sampling that I did over 3 years for my PhD research, as well as based on the sampling that others have done in the gravel bed reach, we found juvenile sockeye salmon consistently locating only in slack water habitats, which on this figure we refer to as channel nooks and bays. And this is consistent with the literature where juvenile sockeye are found in other river systems as well. Adult sockeye salmon moving upriver in migration don't tend to be associated with any particular habitat feature as they're making an upriver migration. So they're just following sort of energetically favorable flow paths upriver.
And are you aware of any sockeye that spawn on the gravel reach?
I'm not aware of any sockeye salmon that spawn in the main stem gravel reach, but I am aware of a population that has been observed spawning in a slough habitat towards the top end of the gravel bed reach. The slough is referred to as Mariah Slough, and this population has been observed in at least 4 different years over the past 3 decades. So the observations indicate it's a sporadically occurring population of very small numbers. These numbers have been as small as 2 adult sockeye in some years, such as 2006, but as large as up to 100 adult sockeye in 1986. But the observations suggest that it's a sporadically occurring population.
Right, and you just identified that you spent 3 years doing surveys of fish in the gravel reach as part of your thesis?
That's right, between the years of 1999 and 2001.
Right, and as part of your thesis was within the scope of that work to determine what species, aquatic species, are using the gravel reach?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
All right, if I could ask you to turn to your thesis table 3-4, which is at page 53, and let me find the ringtail number for that. So that would be ringtail number 77. Right, what does this table show? I see, first of all, I'll just identify that sockeye is noted here, sockeye salmon, O period Nurka on the second to the last line under salmonids. What is this table illustrating or describing?
This table is a summary of my catch data using a beach seine net based on 960 beach seine samples, and it reflects the occurrence of the species in the gravel reach, the occurrence of those species in my beach seine samples. So out of a total of 960 beach seines that were carried out over 3 years, sockeye salmon occurred in 11.7% of those. And that corresponds to, I believe, around 105 of the 960 samples. So at least 1 or more juvenile sockeye salmon were found in 105 of the 960 samples.
Right, and then table 6.1, which is ringtail number 199. What does this table show?
This table is based on the exact same data set of 960 beach seine samples, and it reflects the total number of fish caught in those beach seines, a total of 40,000, and it demonstrates that on average, sockeye salmon represented 0.8% of my total catch. So that was 201 juvenile sockeye out of a total of 40,974 fish. So these fish were caught over multiple seasons and over 3 years.
Thank you. I'd also like to take you to the PPR and ask you to assist me in making a correction at page 6 of that document. So the top of the page, which is in paragraph 8, you'll see it says, it's describing the fish in the gravel reach. It says, sockeye salmon are not, this is the beginning of the sentence on the previous page, sockeye salmon are not known to spawn in the gravel reach, unlike pink, and it says coho salmon. I don't think coho is right. Should it be a different?
And that's correct. That should say chum.
Or chinook? Or just chum?
Pink and chum are known to spawn in the gravel reach. That sentence should be corrected to chum.
Thank you. Without taking you to it, in your PhD thesis, you referred to the sockeye salmon that you found in your study as accidentals. What did you mean by that, and is it still your view that they're accidentals?
At the time of conducting my research, I was aware of river-type sockeye occurring in the Pitt River, and I make mention of that in my thesis, and this 201 sockeye that I caught over those 3 years was puzzling to myself and to my committee members, including Dr. Rosenau. And at the time, the body of knowledge we had on these river-type sockeye, we discounted the possibility that these sockeye might be these river-type juveniles, and instead we referred to them as accidentals, indicating that we expected they were likely strays from a lake-type population that had either inadvertently or deliberately moved out of the lake environment to rear in the gravel bed reach. And the fact that we found them in such low numbers I guess, substantiated that view. Now, with more information available on this river-type juvenile sockeye that we know of, I would perhaps refer to them as incidentals, but there's no way to be absolutely sure that they would be either a lake type or a river type sockeye without genetic analysis. There's a likelihood that it might have been a mix.
Okay. Are you aware of any other studies or surveys or work done, published or unpublished, that would help understand the number of sockeye salmon using the gravel reach?
In addition to the work that I've carried out, there have been extensive stock assessment surveys done over many decades, over the fall month periods during spawning, that have looked for all species of Pacific salmon, including sockeye, and some of those observations I referred to earlier. There's been some work recently done by Dr. Rosenau that he might speak to later, and some of his students. That more or less sums up the body of work I know of on sockeye.
Right. I'd like to move to Dr. Rosenau. You have done some sampling work in the Fraser River, and I think going back to 2007, you did some sampling work in the Fraser River, which data was provided to Canada. Is that right?
I think you're referring to the BCIT studies, is that correct?
Well, I'm actually looking at...
the ad hoc gravel committee work.
Right, there was a...
Yes.
If you look in Canada's binder of documents, there's an email at tab 3 and some data following in tab 4. So this is an email from you to Barbara Mueller, and it attaches the sampling results or the, I don't know how to describe it, but the work that's at tab 4, which is, I think, taken from the sampling work you did in the river.
Yes, that was basically it was a single-day survey that I conducted, or a bunch of us conducted, through the auspices of the Fraser River Gravel Stewardship Committee, and we got permission through a sampling permit to be able to look at and sample some of the sites that we thought were of importance in the gravel reach upstream, from Tranmere Bar upstream.
And if you could, Mr. Lund, turn to tab 4 and go to the very end of that document, the last 2 pages. And maybe just before you get there, Dr. Rosenau, you can just explain what you found when you did that work.
Well, we found, I think it was about 8 or 10 species, different species of fish, inhabiting a variety of different habitat types, some of those habitat types of which Laura has mentioned already. Most ubiquitous and probably the highest density or highest numbers were Chinook salmon, juvenile Chinook salmon, which is understandable. Juvenile Chinook salmon utilize the gravel reach very extensively. We also found some non-salmonid species, cyprinids, which are often known commonly as minnows, and catastomids, which are suckers. We also found a number of salmonids that were not Chinook, including, I think, maybe a cutthroat trout or 2, some whitefish, and we also found juvenile sockeye salmon. Now, those sockeye salmon, I just want to make a bit of a distinction, which Laura didn't make, but I think she can appreciate what I'm saying here. When you refer to juveniles, you can refer to animals that have lived a year in fresh water in lakes, and when they smolt or go out to sea, that's one life history phase. The fish that we're talking about, the life history of sockeye salmon that we're predominantly talking about today as juveniles, are young of the year, or fish that have not spent a full year in fresh water, or have just passed that full year if you catch them in January. And so those are the juveniles that we caught at Tranmere Bar, and we caught them in what I refer to as a nook.
Okay. The page that's on the screen now, which is ringtail 19, what does that describe?
Basically, What it basically says is, of the 10 habitats that we, or the 10 locations that we sampled, the 2 locations that we found juvenile young of the year sockeye were Upper Spring Bar and Tramner. And at Tramner, which was kind of a very discrete habitat relative to the other habitats that we looked at. So in other words, it was one of these channel nooks that Laura describes. I think we caught something like 13 sockeye in the mix, in addition to a large number of juvenile Chinook.
And then the following page, does this tell us anything different from what you just described?
It's just a continuation of what I described. We found very large numbers of Chinook in particular habitats. The bar directly across from Tramner Nook had a lot of Chinook. There were Chinook upstream, but again, Tramner Nook was the one location, the one habitat feature, and it's consistent with Laura's thesis where she found most of the juvenile young of the year sockeye in nooks as opposed to the spectrum of the other 8 or 10 or 12 habitat types that she found. And the Tramner Nook was kind of unique insofar as it appeared to be groundwater fed, that is water percolating from out of the ground. It wasn't just still water environment. And one of the hints that it might have been groundwater is that it was very intensely covered with algae as opposed to a lot of the other habitats that we looked at. So the water chemistry or the water temperatures or whatever was different about Tramner. These sockeye were very clearly, in my view, in my opinion, attracted to that site.
And then did you go back to the Tramner site in 2010?
Yes, we did. We went, sort of the same group of people or a similar group of people under the auspices of the Fraser River Gravel Stewardship Committee, went out on a day, December 17th. DFO was gracious in providing us with a permit to do this. And we didn't have a lot of time that day, but one of the things that I wanted to do was go back to Tramner and basically say, okay, this is my hypothesis. If that particular habitat type is special to sockeye, will we find them again? We went back to the Tramner Nook. It was there in one form or another, similar to what it was in 2007. And essentially the first seine that we did, we caught sockeye again. So there's something consistent going on there.
And did you prepare a document to set out the observations and photographs of the work that you did that day in December 2010?
That's right. A colleague of mine, Otto Langer, was the first person to provide a document, and I basically abstracted his key points, put the words in my own way, wrote them down on paper, and that document was submitted to you.
All right, and that's at tab 28 of the commission documents. Could I have that marked, please? It's the next exhibit.
Did you want tabs 3 and 4 marked?
I did, thank you.
Tab 3 will be marked as 1,072. Tab 4 will be marked as 1,073. And now you wish your list tab 28 to be marked, which would be 1,074.
Yeah, no, that's correct, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Baker, I note the tag.
Thank you.
John? Yes. Can I just, could you just bring up tab 3, or it would be now 172, I'm sorry.
Just the face, is that the only thing at that tab?
The email is tabbed.
Right, I just, so you know, maybe it's just me today, Ms. Baker, but I think I do have Commission's Council's binder. At my tab 3, there's a...
No, I'm going so fast, I apologize. It's in Canada's binder, a very small binder.
Your mic's not on.
Excuse me, Canada's binder, a very small binder,
Oh.
was where the tabs 3 and 4, the 2007 sampling was found. Yeah, so you've probably got it there in your hand.
Okay,
You should have an
so-
email at tab 3 and then those data at tab 4.
Yes, I think it's just for the record, so you've been saying tab 3 of Commission Council and...
I did
tab
talk
4
about tab 3 of Commission Council initially. That was the Rempel and Church article.
Yes,
And I
correct.
may have gotten mixed up here
Oh, I
and said,
see.
potentially I got that mixed
I
up.
think that's what happened.
Sorry.
I was still on the Commission's binder. All right, that clarifies it for me. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Okay, thank you.
Meeting is now adjourned for the day, and we'll resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.